I was really intrigued to hear about the collaborations that Barry mentioned about COCO Action, and also that Standard Chartered being involved in addressing Ebola. And talking about purpose in a 164-year-old bank. These are new conversations reflecting a very new era for business. So I am joined today by two leading thinkers. I also just want to point out this wonderful all-woman panel. Just woohoo! And they're going to help shed some light on, what is driving increased collaboration. And also, if, as Zahid was mentioning this morning, this really is the new normal or almost the non-negotiable for the work that we're trying to do, then how do we do it? How do we get better at collaborating? And building, I guess, these new muscles, and to use sports terminology, our new muscle memory for collaboration. So sitting here on my right, Kate Raworth is an economist who, as many of you might know, Tim Jackson, who talked about sustainability without growth, kind of questioning the notions of growth. He refers to Kate as someone who's reclaiming economics, and as an economics major, thank you, Kate. So reclaiming economics to address 21st century challenges, the challenges that we know are very complex, very systemic in nature, and that current economics is not fit for purpose. She's the author of a best-selling book, which many of you may have heard of, called Donut Economics: 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. She teaches here in Oxford at the university's Environmental Change Institute. She's also a jazz singer. They're taking away the piano, so we won't have a chance to hear Kate sing for us unless you want to improvise. And she's the mother of twins, so she's definitely a master of improvisation. And then here on my left is Jane Nelson, who's the director of the Corporate Responsibility Initiative at the Harvard Kennedy School. She's also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. You can read her bio. Jane has decades of experience working at very high levels of collaboration, not least of which included CGI, the Clinton Global Initiative, and the UN Global Compact. She's authored 5 books, 90 publications, one of which that she's launching today, looking at partnerships for sustainable development, which was commissioned by the Business and Sustainable Development Commission, another cross-sectoral collaboration. But also, when I was speaking with Jane, I was curious to know a little bit about what drives her and what got her into this work. She was born in Zimbabwe, and she mentioned to me that her father was the director of a multiracial, opposition party movement in Zimbabwe at the time, which must have been a very tense kind of environment to grow up in, and what you described to me is just really observing the essential need to reach out across silos and to collaborate with unlikely allies to make the change that you all wished for. So welcome to Kate and Jane. It's very, I would say, complex material that she's going to be distilling down for us in a very, I'm sure, fun and improvised way. I'll probably ask one follow-up question, and then Jane will do the same, sharing some of the insights from her most recent work on collaboration for systems change. And then we'll invite you to ask some questions. So please do be thinking those questions along the way. We'll try to give you a bit more airtime than we were able to in the previous session.
For me, so I'm going to start with purpose. I think we always have to start with purpose. And for me, purpose starts with donuts. Cue the donut. There's a lady who knows to cue the donut here. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about the donut that's at the heart of donut economics that I talk about. For me, the donut is a picture. One picture we could use as a compass for the 21st century, a compass of where we actually want to get to. It's coming. Yes, there we go. So what is that? It's a donut, the kind with a hole in the middle. In that hole in the middle is a place where people are falling short on life's essentials, be it food, health, water, education, income, political voice, gender equality, income equality, networks, housing. These 12 inner dimensions, I crowdsourced them from the Sustainable Development Goals. So they are the social priorities of the Sustainable Development Goals. You could say they are the most contemporary statement internationally of what has been agreed to be the minimum standards of human well-being. Because every person has a claim on these, we can call them human rights, has a claim on these to lead a life of dignity, opportunity, and community. So we want to get everybody in the world out of that hole in the middle, over the social foundation, into that green juicy donut itself. But, we cannot overshoot the outer crust of the donut, because there we put so much pressure on this extraordinary living planet that we begin to kick it out of kilter. We cause climate change, ocean acidification, a hole in the ozone layer, extraordinary levels of biodiversity loss, excessive fertilizer use that depletes the soil and runs off and kills the life in lakes and rivers, air pollution, chemical pollution. These, of course, are the 9 planetary boundaries drawn up by Earth system scientists such as Johan Rockström and Will Steffen since 2009. They believe that these are the 9 critical Earth system processes we depend upon to keep us in a stable, healthy planet. They are essentially the life support systems of the planet. So human well-being depends on both, meeting each person's needs and rights, but also ensuring the planet gives us that stability. So to me, this is a compass for the 21st century. How do we meet the needs of all within the means of the planet? And if it's a compass, we need to know where the needles are pointing. It's not pretty, but this is where the needles are pointing. Many millions of people worldwide fall short on life's essentials. Oh, dear. Many people, thank you. Many people in the world fall short on life's essentials. On food up there, 11%, that wedge is 11% towards the middle of the circle, because 11% of people are undernourished every day. On water, 9% of people don't have access to improved water sources, and 1 person in 3 doesn't have access to what we would call a toilet. But you can see on all of those social dimensions, people are falling short on life's essentials. So we have to eliminate that red from the middle. And we have already overshot 4 of the planet's planetary boundaries, causing climate change. For example, the ecological ceiling is 350 parts per million carbon dioxide. That's the 350.org of Bill McKibben's campaign. We've already gone over 410 parts per million. But we're also massively over on biodiversity loss. If that wedge was complete, it would hit the side of the room. Massively over on excessive fertilizer use, and massively over on land conversion. We don't even know where we are on air and chemical pollution. So this is the state of humanity at the beginning of the 21st century. And on this record, we are going to go down as the generation of reckless overshoot. That's how our children's grandchildren will remember us. Not for Brexit, not for Trump, but for being the generation in this situation that could have done something about it. And of course, the question is, will we? Will we turn this around and become the generation actually of extraordinary turnaround that begins to bring us back in planetary boundaries and for the first time meets the needs of all within the means of the planet? So I've shown this diagram to many businesses over the last 5 years. I first drew it in 2012, particularly at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, meeting many, many companies, some of whom in this room, but from all over the world. And I've heard 5 essential responses to the donut. So the lowest, and the one that really doesn't work, is sort of do nothing. Well, business is business. That's a pity, but we're going to carry on. What we're doing is, nearly legal, and until somebody changes the rules, we'll just carry right on. Next step up, we'll do what pays. If it pays to cut my carbon emissions, because actually that's more efficient and I'll save money, we'll do that. If it pays to get some sort of fair trade mark or a green mark, because that gives me niche access, we'll do that. It's so incremental, it's never going to get us there. So the third step up is to do your fair share. And that's dangerously, I think, driven by the science of planetary boundaries. Ooh, how much does the world need to cut its carbon emissions? Well, we'll do our fair share of that. My country's on track for cutting its emissions by 20% in 20 years, let's say. We'll cut our emissions by 20% in 20 years. Trouble with that, as anyone knows who's been to a restaurant with their friends and everyone's chipped in what they think's the fair share and you're the one paying the bill at the end, it never quite adds up. And it very quickly slips into not what's my fair share to do, but what's my fair share to take? I've had companies, particularly, say, fossil fuel oil companies, say to me, that climate change budget, how much of that is ours? As if companies have a claim on the right to pollute the world, which, of course, now that we know too much, just cannot be true. So, do nothing, do what pays, do your fair share. We've got to get above this and start getting transformational. Beginning to be transformational. Do no harm. Do mission zero. We're going to have net zero carbon emissions, no violations in our supply chains. Beginning of transformational ambition. But as the designer Bill Madonna says, why do less bad when you can do good? Doing less bad is just doing less bad. Break through that ceiling of imagination and move to a place of transformation, which is what I would call being generous. A company that is generous by design. Generous in the sense that it is generative of the value that sustains the world. It's generative in this it's distributive by design. It creates value that is distributed far more equitably with all of those in its supply chains, in its employees, with its communities who help generate the value it creates, but also regenerative by the design, and that it works with the living systems of the planet. It becomes a cyclical, a circular, a cradle-to-cradle economy. So I think the top level of aspiration, if we're going to have a chance of getting in here, we need businesses that are distributive and regenerative by design. And I want to focus in a little bit on collaboration and the transformation we need to have the kind of collaboration that's going to make that possible. So it's amazing what you can find down the back of a sofa, but here I have some hose pipes. So think of this as the linear, degenerative industrial economy of the 20th century. You grab some of Earth's materials, you stick them in the pipe, take some fossil fuel, stick it in, turn it into stuff you want, we use it for well, spit it out the end and landfill it, you know. So that's the linear, degenerative economy. Now, of course, what we need to do to that, because waste is food, is bend that round and make a circular economy. So can I pass that to you, Jane? There we go. There's a circular, just one circular. Right, there's one company making it circular business. Another one saying, oh, well, I've got my business over here. I make, you know, maybe she's making cars, and I'm over here, I'm making electronics, and I'm going to make another circular economy here. So here we are. Now Maggie's got one. So we've got two little circular economies. The danger with the way that circular economy is going at the moment is I would say it's just at level 2. It's I'm going to do what pays. I'm going to make my business circular within the constraints of the current financial system, within the shareholder returns that I need. So actually what I'm going to do is bring back all of my own products and bring them back in my supply chain and create an in-house controlled supply chain that I can create my circular loops. That's the circular economy. Now I want everybody in the room who works for a household name brand to also make a little circular economy. Let's imagine if all the brands in the room make a little, thank you, yeah, there we go. Right, so there's a lot of little circles appearing, and if every brand said, this is how we're going to do circular economy, we're going to make this little, a lot of people left out, a lot of people with nothing to do here, right? But the brands, we've got our circular economy, we're doing circular. You can bring your hands down. Now the trouble with this is that it's in-house, it's top-down, it's opaque. I'm controlling my materials. I'm controlling my proprietary technologies, and I've got my patents over my materials. I'm not going to tell you what they are. I want them back. And it's fragmented. Western consumers own about 10,000 goods. There's absolutely no chance that we're going to return our cars to this loop, mobile phones to that loop, our plastic bags over there. It's not going to work. So pop those down. We need a different kind of circular economy. There's other things behind the sofa. Here's what we need. Circular economy. This is the kind of circular economy we need. An ecosystem of circularity, where industries collaborate across products, across industries, to actually create an ecosystem. You see, because this is what nature does. Nature has an ecosystem of resources. And look at all the joints and all the parts. I think there's about 480 parts in this. That's a lot of jobs for a lot of people playing a part in that role. Not just within one company, but creating an ecosystem where it can actually involve those who already are the waste pickers of the world, involve those who already are the small-scale organic farmers of the world, those whose jobs it already is to try and create a circular economy, not push them out, but to involve them. So I'm going to stop there for the moment, because there's a big question as to how you get from one to the other, but I'm going to stop there for the moment. We need an ecosystem of circularity if we're going to have a chance of bringing ourselves back in planetary boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you. And can we keep that?
I'll keep it here. I'll hold it.
Fantastic. Collaboration, I'm going to use your no, well, thank you. Thanks very much, Kate. And I think your donut is probably one of the most clear and concise sort of expressions I've ever seen of what clearly is the fundamental leadership challenge of our time in terms of meeting what everyone needs in a way that respects planetary boundaries. Or I think another way it's being framed is creating more inclusive economies that are also sustainable. So these concepts of inclusion and sustainability at the core, or meeting needs within planetary boundaries. So clearly the leadership challenge of our time. And I also just want to say it's so fantastic to be here with this amazing community of colleagues and friends and connectors. And I'm sort of looking out around the room and seeing a number of people here who I've had the privilege of working with for a quarter of a century in a few cases that I can see people, and well over 20 years with many. And then it's also really brilliant to see so many students here. And then to see this incredibly dynamic mix of business and government and civil society, and see some of the British government's, CDC and DFID and others in the room as well. And having this vibrant, dynamic community, I think, is absolutely crucial to the way forward. And so it's fantastic to be here. And what I wanted to touch on, also very strict instructions, because I know he's probably watching online. We wouldn't have been an all-women's panel. I know some of you were expecting David Grayson to be here. He unfortunately had some major knee surgery last week, but he said he's here in spirit, so then sends best wishes to everyone. What I want to do very quickly is just highlight, based on research that David and I and others have done, sort of 3 areas of collaboration that I think are really really important going forward, and of sort of increasing levels of complexity, but then also opportunity and ecosystem impact. And the first is what I would sort of call operational financing and implementation partnerships on the ground. The sort of, roll up your sleeves and actually deliver projects and programs on the ground, often 1 or 2 companies working with 1 or 2 NGOs or a government entity, and then sort of building sort of ecosystems at the sort of the local level of partnering. And I think we've already heard some, great examples. The Livelihoods Fund of Mars, I think a great example. And I think what was fantastic there is Mars and Danone, 2 companies working together in a really, conscious collaborative way, and then building the ecosystem of partners around those 2 companies. I know we've got Abbott in the room here, Kathy Pickus, and there's a great example they've got in Tanzania, where this one company worked with the Minister of Health in Tanzania and said, okay, the health system is really weak here. What can we as one company do? And by strengthening the main referral hospital in Tanzania, and then working with other partners in the sort of the ecosystem of regional hospitals around the country, they were able to build something that has reached millions of people, and using technology to build labs and emergency care in the core hospital, and then distributing it out to regional hospitals. Is just one other example. I know GSK are here, and their partnership with Save the Children. Again, I think a great example that, when you look at it, it's okay, it's GSK and it's Save the Children, but then you go into it in more detail, and it's these 2 organizations are saying, right, we can deliver medicines to kids who need them. We've got this really ambitious goal of reaching 1 million children, saving the lives of 1 million children. We can deliver direct medicines to them, but we can also build the capacity of healthcare workers in hospitals. And actually, we need to do policy advocacy, because we've got to get the policy systems working. And to do that, these sort of 2 organizations have come together and, again, built an ecosystem of partners around them. So what looks like a simple sort of 2-organization partnership is a rich ecosystem of partners. So that's sort of the first category of partnership, I think, is going to be really important, getting us to scale and systemic impact. And there are hundreds of those types of partnerships. And I think the ones that, to me, are the most exciting and rarely work are working with the core competencies and capabilities of the organizations involved, a relentless focus on local capability building and local sort of systems building, and then being very innovative. Vivina asked a question earlier about the financing, bringing in financial partners to be innovative around the financing and building the ecosystem around the core partnership. So that's the first category. The second category, I think, has enormous untapped potential, and we heard again a few examples today, are pre-competitive business alliances within the same industry. So it's not quite that, but it's probably sort of, I was never very good at Peter, Blue Peter, whatever it was, but it's sort of probably that within one industry sector, peers and competitors working together to shift the industry, some of the obstacles, the governance gaps, the market failures within the industry. And Cocoa Action is a great example. I guess Better Cotton Initiative is more a multi-stakeholder example, but also very much an industry example. I know we've got mining companies here, the International Council of Mining and Metals. They realize we've got a lousy reputation. This was well over 10 years ago, nearly 20 years ago now. How do we, the leaders in the industry, come together in a really progressive, visionary way, set standards for ourselves as an industry, and then commit jointly and hold each other account to live to those standards. And if you take every industry sector, the opportunity for peers and competitors to work together on an industry sector basis, I think is very untapped and something that we need to do more of. And also chambers of commerce, instead of them being sort of lowest common denominator or trade associations, how do they get their millions of members to commit to one or two even your sort of key goals, and a lot are beginning to do it on climate, but how do they do it and using the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework? And GSMA, which is the trade association for the mobile operators, has done that and said, okay, we as an industry, here are the Sustainable Development Goals that we can really have an input to, and how are we going to get all of our thousands of members together to work on this? So that's the sort of second area. And then the third area, I think, really is, Kate's very kindly holding it up so it doesn't collapse on us, but what I would sort of call the multi-stakeholder, very, very rich dynamic partnerships that are obviously by far and away the hardest types of collaboration to develop. And you've got to get this strange mix of a very, very strong shared vision of dozens, if not hundreds of different actors, and yet allow the creativity and the innovation of the individual actors to still work. And I think we're beginning to see it. You could say the Gavi, the Alliance for Vaccines, the One campaign, I think, which is a very sort of fluid network of all sorts of partners working together with a very clear common mission, but then lots of creativity and innovation amongst the participants, and then also mechanisms to hold each other to account. And the more one can bring in civil society, academics, research institutes, governments, financial institutions into these multi-stakeholder initiatives, I think the more opportunity we have for building this really dynamic ecosystem that is going to achieve the type of systemic change that we need. And I think there are enough examples in all three of those categories, but even the third category, there are enough sort of emerging examples. I mean, to me, despite some of the short-term doom and gloom in the world and the worrying long-term trends, there is enough examples of what's working that I really think it is going to be able to, it's going to be possible to scale up action with the right leadership from different sectors.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you. I love this simple model, just completely encapsulating where we need to go. Thank you both. I'm going to ask just one question for both of you to answer, and then I'll turn to the audience. So please do have your questions in mind. We'll have about 10 minutes for questions from you. But I'm sat here thinking, wow, first of all, everybody please read their research in their book, or Kate's book. There's a lot in there in terms of examples of what's working and where we see this emergence of new types of collaboration and regenerative models. The question I'm sitting with is the how. So how do we create collectively this beautiful ecosystem of regenerative and distributive economy? So the question I have for both of you is, you talk about mindset, Kate, in your book. You give a great example of a developer who has this opportunity to build a regenerative building. And he said, well, why on earth would I build something to give clean air to somebody else, clean air to the community? Why would I, create something for the benefit of others? So moving from linear to circular, but also distributive. So what are the mindsets required as well as the skill sets required to achieve this? And then as part of your answer, thinking about who's in this room, people that have the capability, the influence to get those skill sets to their teams, to their employees. So what advice would you give to business leaders about helping their teams become more effective at collaboration? So mindsets and skill sets and help these people.
Okay, so I'm on the outside of business, but I've had lots of conversations with people in this space, and I've heard two, I'm going to stylize it very simply. I hear two very different mindsets in play, and I'm going to call one of them 20th century finance, or 20th century business, but it's driven by 20th century finance thinking. And the question it asks in the world is, how much value can I extract from this? How much value can I capture? And that's where the mainstream shareholder model comes from. That's where the fiduciary duty to maximize profits, dividends, it's driven by that. But the people I meet who have twinkles in their eyes, who are people like Janine Benyus, the biomimicry expert who proposed this new building that could filter the air for the residents and then put clean air back into the city. People who are creating social enterprises, new product lines that actually help clean the environment, sequester carbon in the soil. People who are thinking in terms of bringing humanity into space. The question that you can hear implicit in everything they're doing and seeking is, how many benefits can we layer into this? And I think the 21st century is going to be a face-off, a psychological drama between these two mindsets. Because at the moment, what I see is the people asking this very 21st century innovative, brilliant question, how many benefits can we layer into this? Benefits so that actually we don't have to capture all the value for ourselves. We make a great return, but gosh, we're giving things to the community. We're giving back to the environment. We're reinvesting in the planet on which we depend. We're restoring it, restoring communities. They are still having to go to what I'm calling 20th century finance to ask for funding. And of course the question is, but how much value can I capture from that? And why would I be designing something that's giving things away? So I'm intrigued, and what I wrote on my little labels, I'm looking for great examples of companies and financiers who are managing to overcome this. So you can either have companies or financiers who are starting in that 20th century place of how much value can I extract from this? How can that mindset be changed? Do we need to prove that social environmental value has long-term financial value? Like making the case always to the financial master? Or is it a matter of actually just, it'll only happen if we reinvent new forms of finance that say, you know what, I'm starting with the same values as you. I'm totally aligned with you from the start. So the financing system and mechanism that I'm setting up is aligned with your idea of generating enough value that we get a fair return, but that with the purpose is to benefit, layer in these benefits so we're actually bringing people out of poverty and bring ourselves back within the means of the planet. To me, that's the drama. And I meet so many people who are caught in that drama, or those who are really excited because they're finding ways around it. And I would love to meet people in this room today who feel that they're on the upswing of the new breakthroughs of ways of new finance or new business that actually breaks that psychological lock-in that we cannot be beaten by.
I
think many of us would like to meet you, so maybe we just
absolutely
just end here after the session. Jane.
I will sign up. And I think very much building on that. I think sort of two sort of crucial mindsets for me, and one absolutely is that mindset about shared benefits or shared value. And really thinking in a very, very intentional way, how are we creating benefits or value as a company for as many of the different stakeholders in our ecosystem as possible, and being super, super intentional about that. So I think that's absolutely one of the areas, and I agree that there's a real tension there at the moment. I think we're going to see, it's not going to be simple as this side is going to win and this side is going to lose, in the sense that I think at one level, a lot of the creativity and innovation is coming from social entrepreneurs, new business models, new governance models, B Corps, etc. But I do think we're seeing some of the large companies shifting from it being just about a small, skunk work team in the company innovating around this, to the company actually really embedding these views and in its broader strategy. And just hearing our two business colleagues this morning speaking, I was thinking, it would have been rare to have heard a senior executive from a company talking about poverty in the way that Barry was earlier today. So actually, and aligning an entire company around that. Just this week, Swiss Re announced, as many of you might have seen, that they're shifting $130 billion of their assets under management into ESG, environmental social governance frameworks. Now, it's still not getting us to where we need to get, but I think that the big companies are also shifting more to that shared value mindset. So that's absolutely the first mindset. I think the second mindset to me that's absolutely critical, and the best way to describe it, I would say, is respect. And my colleague John Ruggie at Harvard would reframe it in terms of respect for human rights. But I think respect for the rights and the dignity of everyone. And one of my least favorite terms is, our people are our best asset. So even your own employees, respect as absolutely safe workplaces, workers' rights, wages, etc. But it's also empowering employees. It's engaging with communities in a way that is genuinely respectful, in that it's not a patronizing, we're giving the community some money, but we're co-creating with the community a new way of doing things. It's engaging with government in a way that's not sort of the traditional zero-sum game type lobbying, but a sort of a mutual respect that, governments have tough jobs to do, and really trying to, respect those jobs, but then advocate at the same time when there isn't enough progressive thinking. So that sort of concept and mindset of shared value, and then the respect for people, respect for human rights, I think to me are the two absolutely fundamental mindset shifts that we need. And I think some of the skill sets, just very, very quickly, getting there, curiosity, and again, respectful curiosity of other people, other places, other ideas, and a genuine sort of learning mindset in every interaction one engages with. We always hear communication is so important. I would add appreciative communication, in that so much of communication, and I'm doing it right now, is talking as opposed to the listening. Your generosity, you mentioned that concept of generosity being really intentional about being generous and appreciative in the way we communicate, even with critics or people we don't agree with. And compromise and to be able to compromise and to improvise, I think, and adapt as you're going along. And then courage, courage to have not just the courage of one's own convictions, but to speak out against the status quo on occasion, to do things differently, and to admit. And it was again great hearing both Barry and Vasuki sort of saying today, this is hard work, and we're not going to get it right. And I think one of our biggest challenges up until now, particularly for politicians and business leaders, is it's got to be the perfect story. And the ability to tell storytelling and have the courage to say this is hard work and we're learning together and we're not always getting it right is difficult to do. And I think we've got to train an entire new generation of all of us, to be able to have those courageous conversations. Bank of America, actually in the States, has started an internal series called Courageous Conversations as part of their sort of diversity and inclusion, to have the difficult conversations and respectful conversations that we need to have.
Yeah. Thank you, that's great. Right, hands and mics, questions? Right, why don't we take a few questions at a time? So we've got one gentleman there. You, sir, yes, and we've got one in the back. And we've got, do you have a question? Somebody raise your hand. If you really have a burning question, we've got a burning question here. All right, so 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll take another round if we have time.
Hi, my name is Erinch. I'm from Oxfam, and I'm particularly captivated by Kate's framing and Jane's. My question is, this is a room full of people who work on poverty and development. How do we work together, both as civil society, as businesses, as governments, to help developing countries leapfrog into the kind of business and financial models that are clearly necessary, and leapfrog over some of the models that we've become a bit entrenched in developed countries that are probably no longer fit for purpose if we're going to live within the donut?
Wonderful. So I'm going to ask you to hold your responses till we get all 3 questions. Thank you.
George Gelber from Beals Gelber Consult, with a long NGO background but now independent. My question is, what is the role of regulation? And I guess this applies to the old 20th century mindset, but what sort of regulation will be helpful in getting us to move to the 21st century mindset?
Yeah.
Wonderful. And last for this round, yes. Do you have a mic up top?
Hi, my name is Bramley, and I'm actually moderating one of the breakout sessions tomorrow on agriculture and women. My question is to both Kate and Jane from some of the great schools here in the world. I was at Columbia at SIPA, and at that time we had a Masters of International Affairs, but my degree required to take courses in all the 5 schools: business school, law school, SIPA, journalism, and science, to look at a total integrated degree. And we are here in the SET Business School, so I was wondering if your schools are doing similar things at the Kennedy School and at Harvard to look at when people graduate for MBAs, they actually have a holistic approach. I took classes from Jeffrey Sachs and Stiglitz, but we had to do macro, micro, and then I looked at sustainable development economics. Do you think classical economics has to change the way it's taught in our classes so that graduates actually understand the triple bottom line? They actually put an ecosystem measurement on the planet's resources and the natural capital. Another question is, have you both, since it's all a women panel, I wanted to know, have you done any research on the value to society that women on the planet bring in the context of implementing the MDGs that have gone and now the SDGs? Because without empowering women, there is no business to be done. Because if you invest in a woman, that whole village or community benefits in the Grameen Bank context. So value to society and women. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions. Jane, you ready to?
Absolutely. Well, I'll sort of take them back, back in order. As far as the women's side is concerned, enormous value, and there's now so much research in companies, in communities, at a country level, the importance of gender parity and gender equality. Of the 500 million of the farmers that Barry mentioned, as we know, a large majority of those are women, sort of smallhold farmers. I think specifically on your question of the link with the sort of the MGDs, one of the most interesting studies, if you haven't seen it, it's just come out, Project Drawdown, which Paul Hawken has been behind. And they've come up with some amazing statistics on how women's economic empowerment and reproductive health has an impact on climate. And the more we can invest in women, it'll also have a very, very positive impact. So again, not just that women are going to be often the biggest victims if we don't get it right on climate, but by empowering women, there's a very strong climate link there. So Project Drawdown, it's a very interesting study on that level. On the university and education side, we are way behind. And, we talk about 21st century, 20th century regulation, I think, and most universities, our university structures are still, I think, somewhat siloed. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, but I think finding new ways. Universities have to find new ways of engaging and learning, but also I think companies themselves are increasingly looking at other types of experiential learning opportunities for their people. And I think the more we can have experiential learning between people from different nationalities, different sectors, different experiences, and make it sort of experience-based learning. So there's some more universities, and we are starting to do that, sort of project-based learning as opposed to classroom-based learning, I think is one of the ways forward. But hopefully technology can play a role in that as well. On the regulation front, absolutely crucial. And I think part of the problem is, the political leadership, is stronger in some countries than it is in others at the moment. But so there's the question of national regulation. I think where we're seeing, some of the greatest innovation is sort of municipal level, state level, both, regulations, but also incentives. And, taxing, at the moment we sort of, tax so many of the right things and don't tax the negatives. And so being much more creative about regulation is crucial. And again, I think we're seeing an interesting sort of shift, but a tension with these business alliances that I was talking about, and that a lot of the traditional business organizations are still, a little sort of retroactive in the way that they lobby on regulation. And then you've got these progressive business coalitions that are coming together, and the We Mean Business Coalition in the lead up to the to the Paris Agreement, and in the States, with Trump pulling out of Paris, hundreds of companies who've come together with environmental NGOs, saying A, Paris matters, but B, we need a tax on carbon, and so I think. Business, there's a tension, but the progressive companies, I hope, will lead the way, in terms of much more progressive regulation. And then I think that finally comes back, Erin, to your point, and that one of the biggest things I think we can do to help developing countries leapfrog is some of the global rules of the game. Global agricultural policies are, a good example. And again, I think there's a growing role for business, to advocate with NGOs. Around more progressive global rules of the game when it comes to trade. I think, secondly, one of the most important things we can do is build the capacity and capability of local civil society, local business, and government policymakers in developing countries, and spend more of our money. And it's not the same as building something that's bricks and mortar and it's easy to tick that box. And as we know, building capability of institutions and people is much harder. But I think we just have to renew our investment and commitment in that. And then thirdly, one of my hopes is technology, but being very conscious that technology can have and does have unintended consequences, but thinking creatively, how can breakthrough technologies, whether it's around water, energy, mobile banking, etc., voter voice, both empower the poor more, but also give them more voice and ability to hold their leaders to account.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll start with Erinch's question. I'm going to out Erinch at this moment, asking me as if he doesn't know me. Erinch is my great colleague from Oxfam when I was from Oxfam, so we usually discuss these things over a pint of beer in the pub. But it's a great question. What would it look like to enable this to happen in developing countries? Actually, I don't like that word because we're all developing countries. I've never been to a developed country that's not running down the planet or got extraordinary inequality. So we're all developing. But those countries that for the first time have the chance to leapfrog. So the beautiful thing that's going on in many of those countries is when you look at their energy systems, they look like this, and they're solar panels on people's roofs, right? Bangladesh wants to be the world's first solar nation. So the design of energy in those countries is distributed by design. Unlike ours, which are moving away from, coal power station and nuclear and gradually dragging themselves towards us. When you look at IT and communications, and mobile and telephones, it looks like this in those countries. So the extraordinary thing is they have leapfrogged in terms of energy and information. And Jeremy Rifkin's work in this space about lateral society and networks means that they have a very different platform from which to spring off than the ones that we are managing with, which means that actually businesses and governments and regulators here might not be best placed to advise because don't copy this. Innovate with that. So I would say that what would it look like to create industries that respected and worked with the network base? And then I was saying, you could have a circular economy that looked like this. The most inspiring model for that, to my mind, is open source. There's a wonderful group called Open Source Circular Economy, and they make the argument that look at nature. A single tree doesn't try to reproduce its leaves and fruits from its old leaves and fruits. Nature works together in this complex web, and so should we. But nature is open source. It's modular by design. It's open standards, open data, and accessible, open source in terms of sharing the knowledge about how something's made. One example, the open source vehicle, which is a 100% electric car. It's been designed in Silicon Valley, but it's because of its distributive design, it's being made all over the world. It's open source in terms of the designs of how to make the modular parts of this little electric car are open and freely available on the web. It's modular and it comes in a flat pack, and those who know what they're doing can assemble it in under an hour. It can be shipped anywhere in the world, low cost. So you've got a globally distributed R&D team. You've got a global assembly, manufacturing, customization team. You're beginning to have globally distributed design. The Raspberry Pi is a laptop. These kinds of technologies, I think, are leaping into and working with the energy and information technologies that lower-income countries have jumped into. So I think if they were to go open source, and of course the irony is they're not going to get the advice from here because we don't have open source economies. I think they should leap past our 20th century proprietary closed loop economies and design something very different. And then just briefly on gentleman's question at the back about joined up thinking. So I teach at the Environmental Change Institute, which is a few blocks away, on a course called Environmental Change in Management. And some of the students I teach there then come onto the Saïd Business School and do an MBA. Is there anyone in the room? No? Okay, they're all busy. Rowing or revising for exam. Because they get 2-year funding and they come do and I'm going to be completely honest. I meet up with them and they say, woo, chalk and cheese. Chalk and cheese. Yeah. And then sometimes they're told, oh, but it's wonderful that you're bringing this environmental perspective here. That should not be their role. So I'm being completely honest that I think there's not nearly enough joined up mindset between the business school here and the Environmental Change Institute, which is precisely why I came along today, to be part of building those linkages. There's a huge opportunity to enrich that. Okay. Lastly, on women and the environment and women's role, of course, there's a wonderful connection between these two, that women's unpaid work has often been exploited because it's unpaid, and the environment's unpriced resources, guess what? They get exploited because they're unpriced. So there's a wonderful alliance of understanding there as to why things get squeezed by a system that values that which is priced. And I'm really delighted to hear that the announcement this morning that Oxfam is working together with Mars in terms of the Farmer Income Lab. My blood still runs green because I worked for Oxfam for over a decade. I'm now ex-fam, which is this lovely thing to be. It sounds like a really good alliance and a really good place to start, because women, but often when we think of farmers, there's a picture of a man. Of course, many of the world's most wily, brilliant farmers are women as well as men, and so put them right into that picture. And I think that initiative has a good chance of doing good work.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So I could stay here all afternoon with you two and this group of wonderful people. Unfortunately, we have to move on. So I'm just going to close to kind of recap some of what we talked about. But I love this more good, right? Let's move away from less bad, because that's not good enough. So let's have the courage. Let's be brave to look at how we can come together to create this beautiful ecosystem of change. On a very practical note, something you could do today, we've got a station with the League of Intrapreneurs out in the atrium, and we set that up because one of the things we know is that collaboration is amongst people and between people. And Intrapreneurs is shorthand way for finding people in institutions who get it. So come along, find another member of your tribe, and maybe you can collaborate. So please join me in thanking Kate and Jane. Thank you.